Hi, folks, and welcome to the very first podcast version of the TechFides Executive Roundtable Series. And we've had a lot of fun doing these interviews over the last few months, and we've also realized that the sheer amount of quality content that we're getting from our subjects ends up being double-digit pages worth of transcription, which not many people have the time in their workdays to actually consume. So that brought us to the podcast format, which should give our audience a little more flexibility and freedom to multitask if needed. So with that said, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Here is Aaron Fletcher, co-founder of medical capital venture firm BIOS Partners.
Background is in the sciences. PhD is in biochemistry. I grew up in Colorado. I live in Colorado now, but I did have a period of about 9 years in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's where I started my career. I was at UT Southwestern and then a professor at Dallas Baptist University. While a professor at DBU, I taught biochemistry, cell biology, scientific literature, bioethics, and then started doing some consulting in the financial industry, working with some groups that were identifying short ideas, companies to short in the public markets based on potential fraud and other accounting and finance metrics. They were looking at biotech. I helped them to kind of underwrite some biotech that they couldn't underwrite the science on. We had some success. I won't get into the details of all of those, but we had some good success as a consultant. So I launched my own firm, BIOS Research, in 2012 that identifies short ideas in the public markets, typically $1 billion plus market cap, commercial launch failures, clinical trial failures, overhyped phase 2, occasional fraudulent management, and changes in the competitive environment. And then we also identify some smaller cap long ideas. And in 2013, wanted to start investing in private biotech. And that's how I ended up meeting 2 other individuals, and the 3 of us co-founded BIOS Partners. And BIOS Partners invests in private biotech companies, typically outside of the traditional hubs of biotech. So predominant hubs of biotech are Silicon Valley and the Boston Northeast area, particularly around Boston. We tend to invest outside of that. So we've invested in Minneapolis, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Birmingham, Alabama, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, North Carolina, places. We're about to make an investment out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so that's been a kind of a unique arbitrage for us, if you will, is kind of investing where others haven't. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've created a deal flow where we're now seeing about 300 deals a year of companies that are outside of those traditional hubs, and then we narrow that down to about 2 investments or so, new investments that we make a year. Fast forward to today. So from 2014 to the 2016, we invested in 3 companies, helped start 2 companies, kind of a club deal by deal basis, 15 million. We sold Encore Vision in 2016-17. That allowed us to move to a more traditional fund model. And we did 2 funds. First fund was a closed fund, all invested at one time. The second fund was launched in late 17, raised the capital in 2018. That was 54 million. We've now invested that capital, and we're now raising capital for a $100 to $150 million fund that will invest over the next 4 years. We have 100 million committed, and we're hoping to wrap up fundraising in the next 90 days or so, so that we can be done and focused on companies. So to date, we have now invested about 125 million across 11 different companies, I believe. We've sold one has IPO'd, and 2 more are about to IPO. One of our companies, we also spun out a company out of that company, and that company's IPO'd. So even though we don't have a direct investment in that second public company, we have a significant indirect investment. So anyway, that's kind of where everything's at.
Great. So let's kind of just jump into so you talked about some of the unique things that BIOS is doing, where you're really focusing on areas of the country that are unique or that are not so tapped into, if you will. But I think the model also is a little different with BIOS relative to typical private equity companies, because normally they kind of come in and buy up, and then the intention is to sell it off, do something to it, make it better, and sell it off. But you guys really come in with a little bit different model where you invest some, and I think some of it has to do with possibly the industries you're in and the way pharma works in general. Yeah. But can you share with us a little bit more about how that model works and how
Sure.
you see that being a little unique or different from typical private equity?
Yeah, so we're unique from private equity in that we're really more venture capital, but we're unique within venture capital in that a typical venture capital will invest maybe in 20 to 40 ideas, and then kind of a shotgun approach is how I would describe it. We take a very sniper rifle approach to our investment. So we have we're about to have a $150 million fund, and we only tend to make 10 investments out of that fund. So it's very precise, very, 8 to 10 investments. So, we tend to be much more concentrated. And the reason that we do that is because we spend a lot of time what we call shepherding our companies. So I tell people we have two models. The first one is the disrupting the geographic favoritism of the VC community, which is what I described to you at the introduction. The second one is a shepherding model. Oftentimes you'll hear in the industry the term activism. That's a commonly used phrase. I don't like the word activism because it has the connotation of ripping out management and changing things around. And we look at ourselves much more as kind of coming alongside management, buttressing them, working together, and being a consultant of consultants, if you will. And so that's why I like the term shepherding. So we're a shepherding model. I also have a strong faith, and it tends to sort of, kind of harken back to that as well. So you could refer to it as a cultivation model as well. But we have a shepherding model where we work with our companies and shepherd them forward to, on strategy, on best business practices, on best scientific practices, being a consultant of consultants, as I mentioned before, helping them in, getting into capital markets, et cetera. Because again, we're not in Silicon Valley, we're not in Boston Northeast where the capital markets are located. We can help get them, cross that bridge, if you will. So yeah, that's where our uniqueness model is disrupting geographic favoritism of the VC community, and then a shepherding model where we take a much more concentrated bet and focused position in our investments.
So how has this whole pandemic impacted you guys? Has it accelerated things? Has it slowed things? I mean, have you, not to get into the companies you've had, but the companies you've invested in, but what have you seen happen in the marketplace and with the government that as a result of all of this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So right when COVID happened in March, when everything shut down, I was like, oh man, we're in trouble from a fundraising perspective. That's where I would say we just said we're not even going to try to fundraise. We were only a third of the way to the fund size that we wanted to be. But I just said it's totally pointless to try to be networking and doing that right now. We're going to shut that down, and we're just going to focus on our current companies and making sure we right size everything the best that we can. While simultaneously, I was also saying that, and I said this in that March 25th call that we did with all of our LPs, I felt very strongly that COVID-19 was going to be for the biotech industry what 9/11 was for, say, security business or counterterrorism, a multi-year tailwind. And that has certainly played out to be the case. Biotech as a market, looking at the public markets, biotech as a whole has actually outperformed the market. In fact, it's been the best or second best performing subsector out there. The only one sort of matching them is Zoom and Microsoft and some of these stay-at-home technology plays. And I think that that's going to continue to be the case. I think health is the new wealth. That's a new phrase that's out there. Biotech is right there, taking advantage of and allowing for health to be available. You already had an aging population in the developing world, but you had this real strong negative view on pharma as greedy and taking money away and overcharging, etc. And though that view is still out there, and in some cases rightfully so, there's also been a realization when pharma was saying, we need to have a strong sort of financial underpinning in order to be innovative. I think what's happened in COVID, people have now recognized, wow, I'm amazed at how fast, they should be anyway. It's been, I call it almost miraculous, how fast we have developed vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics for COVID. We had never even heard of this virus until December. The genome was fully sequenced by mid-January. And by February, March, they were starting the first clinical trials in therapeutics and vaccines. And they think, by June, you had the first therapeutic approved. So in 6 months from ever even discovering a disease, you had a therapeutic approved. Usually it's a 6 to 10 year process. And then they're thinking they may have or the first quarter of next year. It's been unprecedented. We've also, anyway, I won't get into all that. So to answer your question specifically, I think that from a fundraising perspective, it was a little bit shocking at first, like, oh man, we haven't met our budget in terms of where we needed to get. What do we need to do to try to not lay off anyone? Les and I, basically cut back our salaries and reimbursement, and we, changed the budget and got rid of travel and all this stuff. But then, focused on our companies as biotech indeed started to catch on as, hey, this is a place you need to be. There has now been an increase in flow. We're an emerging manager, which makes it difficult. It's not like we have a whole bunch of endowments, Harvard and whoever else that just says, I want more in biotech. I'm going to give it to the guys I already trust. It's hard to make those new relationships when you can't fly and meet people face to face. But we have had some success in finally, cultivating relationships that we were working on before COVID. Those have now come to fruition, and that's going well. So in the end, I think this is actually going to be really positive for bios.
Hey, Aaron, quick questions for you. When you think about, you just talked a little bit about disruptions, right? When you think about market disruptions on your field, do you see the disruptions coming from an investment perspective or from research and all of the things that you have been able to deliver in the market field? For example, earlier you just talked about the endowment. You're an emerging manager where you have access to all of those funds, but at the same time, you're not a big Harvard where you have a bunch of endowment coming on top of you, right? So when you think about market disruptions, how do you segregate those two?
Yeah, the market disruptions that are happening in the biotech field specifically, I would say are predominantly around the way clinical trials are conducted. That's where the biggest disruption has been. Clinical trials are a major source of income for medical sites. So hospitals and medical sites, clinical trials is an important source of income. And a lot of hospitals and medical sites, research institutions have gotten a double whammy. The first one is elective procedures not happening. That was a big hit on their revenue. The second one was clinical trials getting shut down or slowed down. Those are starting to come back on, but they're coming back on with nuances so telehealth has been big for just medicine, but there's also been kind of clinical trials, sort of technology in clinical trials that we're starting to see happen too, where we're making it so that a patient doesn't have to come back to the clinical center as often to get their readings. They can actually do them at home and send them in a secure portal. We're seeing the way in which clinical trials are designed to change a little bit, to not make the patient come in as often, but still collect the relevant data. That's really where the disruption's happening within biotech, is the way in which clinical trials are being conducted and designed in order to try to create a fewer touch points while still maintaining, the relevant data for the trial.
Can you expand a little bit on the funding side as far as when you think access to capital in the market versus what it used to be in the past?
So, to the Fed's credit, access to capital has not been hit as hard as one would have expected in a scenario like what we've seen. Normally, if you were to describe the scenario, people would be like, "Oh my goodness." But the reality is capital is flowing quite well, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. However, the nuance to that is that capital is going to those who probably have the easiest access to capital, right? And so the young entrepreneurial company or startup is the one that's probably having the biggest struggle. If they have some gray hair and a lot of experience, they may have already been successful in the past. Well, they're going to be able to get funding very easily. But again, that's, they're not a J&J, but they are, an Elon Musk-like person within their field. And so they're able to get that money pretty easy. I do think that, a younger professor who's invented something for the first time and is trying to now get funding on that is going to have a harder time in this environment. So that's where I think the capital flow is probably more difficult right now.
Got it.
So, hey, Aaron, a little different of a question. In a lot of the calls, of course, you share a lot about the deal flow and the process that BIOS goes through to go from the 100 and some odd opportunities down to the 2 investment decisions that you make. To what degree do you guys look at the technology or automation capability of that potential company to say if this is a good investment, either from they bring some cool stuff to the table that may accelerate the performance of that company, or opportunity to say if they only brought in some additional technology or capability or digitization, it could accelerate this company. So how do you view the use or the appropriate use of technology in these companies in your investment decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have probably the perfect answer that you would be looking for. I think I know where it would be good to go. In our case, is just a little bit unique in that our fund is highly specific to therapeutics and not digital health. So not necessarily enhancing the technology within the healthcare system, which desperately needed, and everything I just described in those clinical trials, that's where that's really taking advantage of. However, with that said, there is an aspect of, the Human Genome Project having been completed, all of this data that's come out of that, molecular biology, cell biology, biochemistry, has really driven the need for technology to sort of integrate that. We have made a couple of investments that were specifically around the way in which they were capturing that technology and turning it into a product. In artificial intelligence, we have an investment that is using artificial intelligence to help with oncology clinical trial design and how to best sort of match the drug to the patient and then build a clinical trial design around that. That was a very technology-focused opportunity. So I'll say that as a theme to an investment, but then I'll also note that there is certain technology that we are just forcing all of our companies to integrate. One of them is on cap table management. So this is relevant whether you're in biotech or in PE, et cetera. The way you manage your cap table, is done with lawyers, and that okay, we gave you options and there's a document for it. And you have an employment agreement that spells out these options. And, you've invested in the company, here's your stuff. It's amazing how that stuff gets lost. and how people will say, here's our cap table, i.e., we have this many shares outstanding, this many investors, this many options, and you say, okay, I want the documentation behind that. Okay, great Excel spreadsheet. Where's the documentation behind it? Oh my gosh. I mean, this is something we insist on in our during our due diligence, and it can be very painful. So a technology solution to that is an application called Carta, and Carta has digitalized all of this cap table process where you no longer, it's like what lawyer saved it in their folder. It's all online. You can see it all online. So we moved all of our companies, or we have our new investments moved to Carta in order for that to save a lot of man hours, a lot of lawyer costs, etc. going forward. So that would be an example where that's just ubiquitous throughout our investments. Now, it's not what drives the decision to make the investment in that company. It's a technology we insist that our companies adapt, if you will.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Aaron, just talking about what you were talking about, it got me thinking from my own personal experience working with BIOS about, when I've gone to look up, the status of my investments, and I've, you guys have had to invest in your website. You've had to do a lot of things as you guys have grown, and you've really grown a lot over the last 4 years. You've gone from a few companies that you put money into with a few investors to now you have 3 funds plus a few companies, and you've got a lot of investors, and I think you're starting to get a lot of groups investing in you as well. So how has that evolved for you from managing the technology and the data and communicating that back to your customers and your shareholders, if you will, because there's more and more that I would think is being asked of you. And I know even, like I said, in our own personal circumstances, there's stuff that I've been like, well, we didn't get that from them. How are they, when are we going to get, and I'm just curious to hear about the evolution of that and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, there's been a lot. So, originally we were in Dropbox. Like, we've always been in the cloud. I guess just that we've always been there. We've now we had to integrate to a different cloud, a system called Box, in order to hit some specific sort of protection security requirements we needed. We've created a portal, so like Karen, you can go and log into that portal and get all of your K1s at any time, all of the quarterly reports in that portal. Now, people remembering that there is a portal or their login, that's a whole nother issue, but we have a portal that we've incorporated all of that in. We've got a lot of technology. In fact, we're just about to switch to another back office technology that helps us for kind of managing. It has a lot more optionality to it. I was just talking to my CFO yesterday because we're making that switch. It'll be a little bit more costly, but it'll give us more optionality because we do have more investors. It is harder to keep up. I mean, when you send out a wire, a request, a capital call, you've got to be correct to the penny. I mean, every single penny counts. And so there's a process that, that's all technology oriented now to help us manage that. We use HelloSign. We've been using this. It's similar to DocuSign. It's just a smaller group that is a little bit less expensive, and we're able to actually adapt to our needs better. And so we've used HelloSign. We've actually incorporated some of our companies to start using HelloSign because it's just so convenient and so easy to use. So I know of at least 2 or 3 of our companies that use HelloSign for all of the board documentations and all, everything they do. And so that kind of technology allows for me, who lives in the mountains of Colorado, it's as if I'm in the office. We have a Zoom account, and we've had to get a conference call line, our own personal conference call line. That conference call line allows us to record any conference call we do. We can then go in and edit that recording. So, for example, when we do our quarterly calls, we're logged in 10 minutes before anything even starts. We can go in and cut out that 10 minutes and send it to someone requesting the recording. So we have a lot of technology that we've had to incorporate that allows us to remain virtual. So when we had to make the switch from coming into the office to virtual, that was that had no impact on us at all because we were already very virtual in the way in which we think. And I mean, Karen, you've heard the story. BIOS research started in my closet, right? In the closet of our master bedroom. We moved to the bedroom downstairs, turned the master bedroom into a spare bedroom, and the master bedroom closet into my office. And then when I hired Amanda for the first time, or Travis, you know, they worked from home, and we would just kind of, you know, email and call and talk. And so we've always been virtual. So the transition was actually very seamless for us, just because we already do that.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask you was, as COVID hit and we did not have people in the office, did you have any struggles with that? But it sounds like that was a piece of cake for you.
That was very much a piece of cake. And I think it was because we have had a virtual mindset even before, out of desire to make it pleasant for our employees, right? So like I could live where next to my family, travel to the Northeast where he has a bunch of friends and does some work at Yale, wanted to be able to stay connected in Yale. And so we always have done that just out of convenience and as a fringe benefit, if you will, to our employees. And now it's become a necessity. So it's an example of technology sort of blessing your employees, then becoming a necessity, you know. I think there's a theme probably somewhere in there to write about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, it's interesting what you were talking, based on the question Paul had asked, you know, you were talking about some of the different technology and investments for the companies you're investing in, some things you're asking them to do, and how the clinical trials are being managed. You know, what do you see as kind of the next big thing coming? I mean, what is it that you know, we were talking about some of the things that are kind of happening, but,
Sure.
But as you look at it, what are the things that you're kind of thinking to yourself, man, if they would just figure out how to do this, or kind of what are the spaces that have you kind of thinking technology could really help in this arena?
Yeah, I think that artificial intelligence is definitely becoming an area that's more in vogue. There's a couple of artificial intelligence companies that are out there, and they're starting to have a pretty big impact in the development, the identification of new drugs, and then on the clinical trial design side, and many other aspects that I probably can't even envision right now. But from, you know, as early as development all the way through clinical trial design, and I don't know of artificial intelligence being used on commercialization, but it very well may be. I don't think there's a specific company that's sort of using it some way, but I do think that kind of machine learning and massive amounts of data and being able to apply that is becoming very important in our field. You know, has always been important and is just becoming more and more important. So I think that's an area that's definitely of importance. You had a question that kind of dovetails on this, where you had asked, you know, is there something, you know, in terms of COVID specific, if you were going to fix COVID off the shelf today, how would you do it? It's testing. I mean, if we could triple, quadruple the amount of tests that we're doing each day in the United States, it would dramatically improve our economy. You know, the way that you have to do that is logistics, and logistics requires technology. You know, in places like Korea, there's actually apps that citizens have chosen to download to their phone. And so to, you know, get rid of the HIPAA compliance or whatever, it's citizens just saying, I want to do this. And then when someone gets COVID, they tell, hey, I have COVID. And now that's on the map, and people know, oh, I need to stay away from that spot. If they start seeing 2 or 3 COVID places coming around because people have self-reported, I have COVID over here, and someone says, oh, I better not, you know, go over to that area. That's an outbreak over there. That kind of technology, you know, would probably work really well if you had plenty of testing going on, where someone could self-test and say, oh, I have COVID. I didn't even know it. You know, I'm going to let everyone else know, kind of thing. So
great comment about Korea. One thing when you think about COVID, specifically here in US, and then you think about the health industry market here, do you see any pressure coming from the consumer here in US as far as to drastically change how they consume healthcare overall? Because obviously when we're looking at international, this is what being pushed. Korea is one of them. A lot of places in Europe, you see technology is really guiding those countries as far as how they should distribute and as well as consume healthcare. What have been your observations here in US?
I think consumers are starting to demand telehealth more. That was kind of a neat idea a year ago, even 6 months ago. That was kind of a neat idea, telehealth. But I don't know. But now the idea has started to resonate with people of your age and my age. That when I'm just going in for a checkup, it's a pain in the butt. Why don't I just have a conversation with my doctor and we talk about, hey, everything's good. I just like another subscription to my cholesterol medication, right? Or whatever it might be. I think that's a consumer-driven product. That's consumers want that, certainly much more so than hospital systems that have built out all of this space in parking lots and whatever. Like, to them, it's not to their advantage to like rip all of that apart, right? I think consumers are starting to demand that. I think that's a place that we'll see. Go ahead.
What about policy and politics? Do you see any influence as far as to allow that market to open based on the consumer behavior? Do you see any issue there?
Let's see. Within policy, politics that have either encouraged or discouraged it. Well, I mean, there's certainly been specific to COVID, and then we can broaden it to healthcare. Specific to COVID, I would say politics and policy has, just cut up all the red tape and move forward, all of these tests and diagnostics. There's emergency use authorization approvals of these diagnostics. There's like 200 diagnostics you can choose from. It's crazy. Now, that has issues with it. They're now finally starting to pull some of those back because some of them just got approved and then they're like, wait a minute, this thing sucks. We need to pull it back, right? But I think that was a place that was positive where policy was, consumers were demanding I need to get tested. I have no idea. But there was nothing available, and I would say politics made that available much quicker than you normally would expect. On the broader healthcare side, I think that I'm probably not as good to answer that question with a strong feel. I mean, I think politics can be both beneficial and detrimental in this stuff. I think that there's not enough policy out there for preventative health care. Policy doesn't encourage preventative health care. It encourages reactive health care. And I think that's a mistake. I'm not the right guy to highlight really great examples of that. But generally as a theme, I think the United States policy does not encourage preventative health care. It really just encourages reactive health care, which I think is not good.
Yeah. So kind of building on some of what we were talking about, based on what's happened the last 6 months, have you guys dramatically shifted your strategy? Has this caused you as BIOS to go in a different direction? Or has it just cemented your strategy and made you feel more confident with it and accelerated it?
Yeah, I think in our case, it's been the latter. It's really cemented the strategy. We are in the right place at the right time, and we need to take advantage of this. And we need to get to cracking right now because you never know, make hay while the sun shines. You don't know how long that's going to last. And I feel like the sun is shining really bright right now in biotech, and I think that there's probably a multi-year tailwind behind it. I've always felt like biotech was a good place to be. I mean, obviously I'm in it, but I always felt that way because there's an aging population, and that aging population has a lot of wealth. They do want to stay younger. They want to be able to, the whole concept is maybe not to live to 110. I'm fine with living to 100. I just want to be able to keep hiking until I'm 99, and then like in 6 months I die. Instead of it's a 10-year dying process and I don't get to do anything. That's really what people want, right? The idea to live to 110 and 120 is not in people's minds. It's, I want to live until I die, and let's narrow that gap, right? Let's make us as, I want to be as if I'm 40 until I'm 99, and then it's gone, And so that's why hip replacements and Viagra and all of these things are so popular, right? And so I think that that's always been an attractive place because of that. But I think now it's only become brighter because people now realize innovation within healthcare is really important, and I'm willing to pay for that. Beforehand, people were willing to but annoyed by it. Now I think they want to, and I think what will happen, if I needed to make a prediction, here's what I would say. Drug pricing is indeed an issue, and you've seen it. I know Paul and Karen, you both have seen it in our quarterly updates. Like if you go back and look at remember the 2 series quarterly updates we did on drug pricing? Yeah. We talked about drug pricing is an issue, but the issue is not in new drugs being expensive. The issue is in legacy drugs that no longer are growing, getting these price increases in order to maintain their growth. Yeah. Insulin's gotten the political punching bag, thank God. Like insulin's been around since 1980, right? There's not been any real innovations in insulin in 15 years. And yet, they keep just increasing the price as they can. I think what will happen is that the market, the politicians will start to realize, look, we do need to have innovation. And by the way, the U.S. owns like 80% of the innovation in biotech and healthcare in the world. We need to keep that. How do we do that while still working on drug pricing? And I'm hopeful the logical thing to do would be to go to these legacy drugs and say, we're capping your ability to increase the price here. That doesn't screw large pharma. It just forces them to have to go buy innovative products, which would only help us anyway, right? If more M&A has to happen, that's better for us who's making innovation anyway. I really think that what I was hoping would be the logical answer to play out, I now think with more confidence will play out because the consumer is wanting innovation in healthcare. They want that now. And I think the government's going to figure out how do we keep that while still fixing this drug price we have. And so I'm kind of excited. I think that's going to prove to be further wind to our back over the next couple of years, whichever administration happens to be in place. I think that's going to be the logical outcome.
Hey, Aaron, I think I'm going to steal that line that you just shared, that I want to live until I die. I'm going to put that somewhere. Because that's a fantastic thought process, right? Because we see too much the elongated cycle time of totally healthy, declining health until death, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of money tied up between declining health and death because of the sustainability things that people do, especially with the Alzheimer's and things like those that goes on. Versus I want to live as best as I can, shorten the cycle between live and death, right? Which, of course, you have a better life, but also you're preserving wealth with your family as well, right? Because you're not giving all that money to sustaining a uninhabitable life, right? Something that's no fun.
I mean, that's the idea behind trying to find an Alzheimer's drug, because that, Alzheimer's patients are relatively healthy, right? But their quality of life is diminished dramatically. And not only is it their quality of life, but the people directly around them's quality, all of it just goes downhill. And if you can shorten that, that doesn't just improve the individual, it improves everyone around them. So you've actually improved the quality of life of maybe 10 or 20 people, not just one, if you shorten it 18 years. Okay? That becomes something that people are willing to pay for. Oncology drugs, it's like, okay, either kill me or save me, and let's just figure it out like in a 6-month time frame, right? And then I'm ready to move on, you know. So.
I'm with you. So thanks for that. I'm writing that down, and I'm going to keep it.
Okay.
So I think, I don't know, do you guys have any other questions for Aaron?
Yeah, one last question. So, Aaron, one last question. So, I mean, do you see, I think you said there's going to be a tailwind after COVID, which would help the industry. But when you think about looking and sourcing deals, do you think you're going to be limited to some degree, or just things going to expand like crazy and you're going to be able to have, instead of looking at 100 deals, you're going to look at 200, 250, right?
Yeah.
So that much more opportunity out there?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it really quick. But we have seen a huge acceleration in deal flow in the last 2 months. Let me see if I can get the exact numbers here for you. Close summaries, here we go. Oh no, that's the summary. Hold on a sec. I think I can get it here very quickly. July deal flow, here we go. Okay. So if I look at where we're at, deal flow count by quarter. In the second quarter of 2019, we looked at 70 deals. In the second quarter of 2020, we looked at 101 deals. That's almost a 50% increase. And to give you a feel, in the first quarter of 2019, we looked at 67 deals. And in the first quarter of 2020, we looked at 77 deals. So we had a little bit of an increase, but that would have only been a 15% increase. And then all of a sudden, we had a 50% increase year over year in the second quarter. And a part of that was just a tremendous amount of COVID deals all of a sudden coming into play. But in general, deal flow really hot. So I tend to think we'll probably see more deals going forward.
Okay.
So I guess in closing, because we're a technology company, we're a group of folks focused on technology. Let me close with a question kind of specific to that. And I guess I would just say is, how could technology help BIOS, not so much for the specific, like what we've talked about relative to the specific companies and how they do trials and things like that, but BIOS as a small company that's growing, how could technology further enhance and help you? As you know, we talked about some of the things with HelloSign and some of those things you've put in place, but what did, to kind of get specific to us, if you will,
right?
What kind of technology and partner from an IT space would be helpful for you? What are the next things you see needing to evolve as you as a company are growing and evolving?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something we actually talk about. Slack is something we've kept talking about. Should we try to incorporate Slack into our system in order to try to help its management of all of the different pieces we're working on? So as the virtual world becomes maybe more ingrained within our company or within companies in general, how do you manage sort of people dividing and conquering, right? I mean, because if you're all in the office setting, you kind of, even if it's just at the water cooler, you might talk about what you're working on and you kind of know what that is. So that sort of creating a single integrated place that we can kind of keep up with who's working on what as we divided and conquered. That's something we've talked about. Slack is something that I'm the one who's actually the most, I'm the rate limiting step to us doing Slack, because I'm like, oh, that's just one more thing I've got to like put stuff into or whatever. But we're trying to figure out, is that something, or is there something like that we could do so that people do know what I'm working on and I know what others are working on in real time as needed. So. I think that's that kind of organization, as you become more virtual, is going to become more and more important.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting at Schneider before I left, they had implemented Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, same concept.
Which is the same concept.
Yeah.
And nobody was using it. Everybody was really struggling because, to your point, it's one more thing.
Yeah.
And so it was out there. We were told to use it. People really didn't know how to use it. And it was just kind of this one more thing. Yeah. And then when COVID hit in March, and all these, and Schneider was a very virtual company already. We used Skype, we used, WebEx in the past.
Right.
I mean, we had lots of tools for doing conference calls. Some were video, some were just conference calls, but people worked all over the country, so we were very comfortable with that. But when COVID hit and everybody went remote, the application started having bandwidth problem. And actually, it was interesting because it was the bandwidth problem on Skype that drove people to Teams, because Teams we could do this kind of call with. And I found it very interesting how here Schneider had been trying to implement Teams for, 6 months to a year. I mean, it was not a new concept of what they were trying to implement, but nobody could see the value in it. Nobody could really justify the migration to it until they had a problem with their other solutions, which was only one small thing that Teams could do for you. But that caused people to get over there. And then once they were there, they started playing with the other parts of the tool. And I mean, I kind of left at the end of March, so this was just evolving when I was there. But in talking to my friends and colleagues that are still there, it seems like that really helped the evolution for people to get on board with, hey, we could keep all our documentation here. We don't have to be sending emails back and forth. Then when somebody leaves, you don't know where it is. So it's kind of interesting what you're talking about in your own personal struggle to make that migration. It's a common place people sit. Yeah. And sometimes you just need that kick in the butt to get you over there. And they had that justification for bandwidth. And once people got there, they started seeing the value.
It's the refiner's fire sort of scenario, right? I mean, you kind of get in that refiner's fire, and you're forced to do something better, and you come out stronger when it's all said and done. You have to force it sometimes. So yeah. Absolutely.
One question for you. You've been in that space for maybe 10 or more years, right? So when you think about the speed of all of the transformations that's going on in the marketplace, specifically with COVID, and what advice would you give to someone just like you, or someone that is just about to start or have started pre-COVID? What advice would you give them about their business today?
Yeah, my advice would be this. The market is big. It's moving fast. There's tons of opportunity. Be fearless. Like, just go out and do it. Fake it till you make it if you have to. But it's a big market with a lot of opportunity. Be fearless. Get out there and try, because it's not like you're a philosophy professor where the market's small, it's getting smaller, and you've really got to kind of work your way very carefully and get lucky to fall into being a psychology or a philosophy professor at some place. This is a market that's getting bigger. There's tons going on. If you think you've got something unique and innovative and a solution to it, I mean, go for it. And especially if you're like me, you're younger. Well, I'm not younger anymore, but when I got started, it's just get out there and try, because this is this is similar to what computers were in the late 80s, right? I mean, why is Bill Gates a billionaire? Not only because he's a genius, but because he was at the right place at the right time in the right field, right? He got lucky. And I'm getting lucky too. And now's your chance. If you're in this field, you have a chance to get lucky. But you can't do it if you're not fearless and out there working hard for it. So that'd be my advice. We're entering a recession. Fear increases. People decrease what they're doing because they're scared to make the move or whatever. And it's like, this is your chance. If you think you got it, do it. Now that advice is probably going to bankrupt a few people, but it will probably also make a few millionaires too.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. It's really been a great dialogue, as always. Hearing what's on your mind is always refreshing. And I guess I would just close with saying, if as you guys are evolving and technology, your IT infrastructure isn't probably what you guys as a company are most focused on. It's not your priority. It's important to you, but not your priority. As you have opportunities and needs, please think of TechFides. We have a unique set of consultants that can really help with both strategy and deployment for what your technology, automation, and IT needs might be as you guys are growing as well. So keep us in mind for future opportunities.
With that, just to make sure, you kind of were talking at the beginning, but so is your goal, what is the goal of tech? Is it to be a kind of consultant? Is it to be the IT place that integrates things, or is it more sort of helping us evaluate what we have versus what we need and then saying, here's who you should go talk to? Or are you integrating it? Help me understand kind of what the goal here is.
So, and team, feel free to jump in. We have 3 core services, right? We are a strategic consultant company.
Okay.
What we do, we step into your business and then help you to facilitate any technology that you want to bring into your environment. And at the same time, if you're struggling with specific technology, we take that role, that leadership role, to make sure that you understand how to make that transition from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So we do integrations. We do provide advice on strategic merger and acquisitions as far as integrated with big company and small company as well. The same things that we do, for example, small or big mid-sized hospital that want to do major integrations, we will jump in and then help them to that as well. Some hospitals still have a lot of money that they spend from an IT perspective, and they don't know how to project manage those spend. We will step in and then help them to assess and then manage those spend.
Got it.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll just add to that is from a strategy perspective, it's about outcomes and business capabilities, right? So every company is trying to find their, how do they separate or distance themselves in their market, right? And step on the competition, if you will. And from a technology or an innovation or digitization perspective, we bring some skills to the table to help that company understand what's possible, right? Here's how you can look at it. Here's what can happen. So help frame out a strategy and an outcome view. And then some companies may have the technology capabilities to execute and implement, and we can help guide that. But if they don't, we have resources that we can bring to bear to help them implement as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's helpful. That helps me sort of understand kind of the right place for it.
Okay, great. Anybody have anything else before we conclude?
I think I would say thank you for the opportunity to sit down with us. And obviously, as Karen said, we will follow up with you and then with a draft. And then you will review it and then give your approvals for publications.
Sounds good, guys. Yeah, sounds great.
Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
This concludes our very first podcast version of our Executive Roundtable series. We really hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks to Aaron for spending this hour with us and providing us his insights into the medical venture capital world. If you're interested in learning more about the BIOS Partners funds as an investor, manufacturer, or medical research firm, please don't hesitate to reach out to Aaron, and we can certainly provide you his contact info if needed. Let us know what you think about the podcast format, as we have a few more of these on deck, and if it works, then we'll keep putting them in this format. From all of us at TechFides, we wish you and yours a happy and safe holiday and a prosperous 2021.